That Thanksgiving, my husband was watching over the nearly done turkey in the blazing red oven when he received a message from a female coworker who was also his best friend. "Boss, I miss you." After a moment of hesitation, I replied on his behalf, "Come over, my wife's not home tonight." A little while later, the doorbell rang. My husband's face turned pale when he saw the gift his mistress had brought. Meanwhile, my father-in-law slammed his hand on the dinner table so hard, the wine glass trembled. "Daniel, you've disgraced this entire family." My name is Madison. I'm 34 years old, and I own a veterinary clinic rated as having the best customer service in San Francisco. A week before Thanksgiving, while I was treating a dog with dermatitis at the veterinary clinic, a message from my mother-in-law made me pause. She said she still wanted to cook this year, even though her knees had severely deteriorated and my father-in-law's blood pressure had risen so high, the doctor ordered him to minimize all stress. I stared at the words, "We'll manage, sweetie," and felt a tightness in my chest. She always said she was fine, always said it was okay, but I knew full well their health was no longer what it used to be. That afternoon, when I returned to the penthouse where the San Francisco wind swept through wide glass panes overlooking the bay, I decided to suggest to Daniel that we host dinner at our place. He looked up from his laptop and smiled like the model husband. "Great idea, it'll be easier on them." I didn't know that in that very moment, the foundations of our marriage had begun to quietly shake from within, so coldly that I couldn't feel it. I spent the entire week redecorating the penthouse, hanging a fall wreath of yellow-orange-red leaves on the door, lining the hallway with white baby pumpkins, placing an orange-brown table runner on the long dining table, scattering pine cones and white-orange pillar candles down the center, turning the space into the cozy autumn scene I'd always dreamed of for Thanksgiving. On the morning of the holiday, the open kitchen was rich with the scent of herbs. Daniel stood before the iconic Red Wolf oven, his favorite thing in the entire house, carefully basting the 18-pound turkey with a mix of melted butter, thyme, and rosemary. I stood at the marble island, mashing potatoes, stirring cranberry sauce, and preparing the stuffing with sourdough bread bought from Ferry Building. Everything felt so peaceful, until Daniel clutched his stomach and winced. "Probably indigestion. Can you keep an eye on the turkey for me?" he said, rushing into the bathroom. I stepped over to check the timer, and at that exact moment, Daniel's phone lit up on the marble counter. The brief message appeared like a blade. "Boss, I've missed you." The sender, Tiffany, his assistant, also his best friend, who, he always claimed, was just there for emotional support. I wasn't jealous, wasn't shocked. I only felt a cold, steady calm spreading down to my fingertips. Daniel thought I'd never notice his password, but I remembered it well. His old college phone number, the one he believed no one would recall. I typed it in, and the screen unlocked instantly. I typed a line as soft as breath. "Come over, my wife's not home tonight." Then I took screenshots of the entire conversation, sent them to a secret email Daniel had no idea I owned. After that, I deleted all traces, put the phone back in its exact spot, and went on mashing potatoes as if nothing had happened. Inside me, a hairline fracture had opened, so small Daniel couldn't possibly see it. But that very fracture, just hours later, would become the earthquake that shattered the life he thought he had under control. And as if by some strange sign from fate, the knock on the door came earlier than usual. I thought it might be Tiffany. Was she that eager? But when I opened it, it wasn't her. It was my in-laws, Elaine and Frank, each holding something familiar. She carried her homemade pecan pie, and he had a Whole Foods paper bag with a box of shrimp cocktail and a bottle of red wine he always brought to family gatherings. Their faces showed a bit of strain from taking the elevator, especially all the way up to the 60th floor of One Rincon Hill, but their eyes lit up when they saw me. "Madison, the house smells amazing," my mother-in-law said, rubbing her knee out of habit as pain overtook her. I took the pie from her hands, hiding the tightness in my throat as I thought about the real reason I wanted this year's dinner to be held here, and not at their home. Less than 3 minutes later, the doorbell rang again. This time it was Emily, Daniel's sister, arriving with her husband Ryan and their 2 kids, who were already arguing over who'd get the bigger piece of turkey. Emily hugged me tightly, handing over a Thanksgiving basket with fresh cranberries, Vermont maple syrup, and a set of napkins printed with maple leaves. "You've made the place so beautiful," she exclaimed, her eyes taking in the room lit with pumpkin spice candles, filled with warmth like a Hallmark movie. I smiled, invited everyone in, poured wine, arranged chairs, asked after my in-laws' health, smoothed the hair of the 2 kids. Every movement of mine was soft, natural, perfect. So perfect no one could suspect that inside, I was silently counting each minute, each second, waiting for the special guest I had personally invited using Daniel's own hands. I glanced at the clock on the wall, the light reflecting on the glass like the slow heartbeat of fate. The whole family was laughing. Daniel was basting the golden turkey once more in the red wolf oven, and I was waiting for the moment when everyone's mask would fall, right in the middle of the Thanksgiving dinner they all thought would be the most peaceful one yet. While the family's laughter mingled with the oven's chime, signaling the turkey was nearly done, a door in my memory quietly creaked open. Just as Emily was recounting how her kids fought over a new box of crayons, I suddenly remembered, 8 months ago, when the cracks in this story began, so subtle most people would overlook them. It started when Tiffany got divorced. I still remember that evening vividly. Daniel sat in the living room, face tense, telling me Tiffany was panicking, crying, afraid she might do something reckless. He said, "She's really fragile, babe. I can't just abandon a friend. What if something happens to her?" And so, night after night, the soft clicks of the door around 1 or 2 a.m. became a familiar sound. Daniel would come home with a tired face, traces of an unfamiliar perfume clinging to his shirt, always with the same explanation. I had to be there for Tiffany to help her through this. I remember one night I gently asked if maybe things were getting out of hand, and Daniel placed a hand on my shoulder and said something I can still hear crystal clear. "I'm the only one she trusts. If I leave her now, she'll fall apart." It sounded compassionate, noble even, too perfectly noble to be trusted. Then one day, while tidying Daniel's office, I stumbled across an online transfer receipt. Emergency fund, $2,500, sent to Tiffany. I remember standing frozen for a few seconds, staring at the number glowing on the screen, like it was trying to tell me something urgent. When I brought the receipt to him, Daniel gave a half smile and brushed my hair like I was being overly dramatic. "Oh, that was an old debt. I lent her that money ages ago, don't you remember?" No, I hadn't forgotten. I just didn't realize when exactly I began convincing myself that Daniel was such a good man, he'd never do anything to hurt me. But now, looking around the penthouse, at my smiling in-laws, the golden turkey in the oven, I knew. The small details I once dismissed were the very warnings the universe had sent me long ago. I was just the only one who refused to read them. And as if the universe had finally decided not to let me ignore it any longer, the doorbell rang, a crisp ding-dong so sharp it made my heart skip half a beat. The entire family at the dining table looked up, and Daniel, who was standing by the oven basting the final layer of butter onto the turkey, froze for a second before trying to act like nothing had happened. I stepped out of the kitchen, wiped my hands on the white cotton towel like any composed host would, but my palms were so cold I could feel the San Francisco fog slipping through the penthouse's thick glass. When I opened the door, my face didn't change, but everything in front of me did. Tiffany stood there. In her right hand was a $450 bottle of Opus One. In her left, a bright orange Hermes gift box, the kind only brought out for special occasions or special men. The scent of Joe Malone English pear hit me instantly, the kind of soft, lingering perfume perfect for someone who wants to leave a mark in an enclosed space. She wore a deep V-neck dress in shimmering black satin, the kind that caught the hallway light like a silent declaration, "I'm here to be desired." Her cleavage was pronounced, hair curled in waves over one shoulder, a glittering clutch dangling from her wrist. Everything about her screamed she was arriving for a rendezvous she thought only he was expecting. Tiffany smiled, that half-confident, sweet smile that said, "I'm here, baby." But it vanished in a tenth of a second when I stepped aside, gently swinging the door open wider. The entire extended family was seated neatly around the long dining table beneath the baccarat crystal chandelier. My mother-in-law Elaine froze, wine glass held mid-air. Frank looked up, his eyes wide. Emily's mouth dropped open, and the two kids stopped arguing entirely, staring at Tiffany like she was a character lost from a TV drama. In that moment, Tiffany's breath caught. Her face turned pale, so pale even her foundation couldn't hide it. She couldn't say a word. And I just smiled. A polite smile no one could fault, but so cold it might burn on contact. Daniel's Thanksgiving dinner had officially begun. I kept that same polite smile as I stepped aside, inviting Tiffany in as if she were an honored guest rather than my husband's secret lover. She stepped in awkwardly, her heels clicking against the marble floor, and I could see every muscle in her shoulders tighten under the weight of the family's gaze. Every eye locked onto her V-neck dress that barely concealed anything. "Oh, Tiffany, you came without warning, so I didn't get a proper glass ready for you," I said softly, almost breath-like, before turning abruptly to the cabinet and pulling out a clear plastic cup, the kind of cheap ones people use at outdoor parties. I handed it to her, casually glancing toward the dining table, where everyone else held glittering baccarat glasses under the chandelier. That contrast, sharp as a knife, made Tiffany's face lose another shade of color. Before she could respond, I placed a hand gently on her back, nudged her toward the table, my voice sweet as melting sugar. "Everyone, let Madison do the honors. This is Tiffany, the best friend Daniel talks to until morning every night." I deliberately stressed the words "every night." The air in the room shifted. Elaine flinched, the pecan pie in her hand trembling slightly. She squinted, then blurted out something that made Tiffany's heart drop straight to the floor. "Oh, the girl I always see popping up on Daniel's FaceTime." Every eye turned to Tiffany. She froze, her hands clenched so tightly, her knuckles turned white. I saw her collarbone twitch as she struggled to stay composed. We're just best friends," Tiffany mumbled, but her words shattered like glass, because she knew they held no weight anymore, not here, not in the middle of Daniel's family Thanksgiving dinner, where every truth was now laid bare to the millimeter. Daniel stood frozen by the stove, still holding the basting brush, a drop of hot butter rolling down the golden turkey skin. No one said a word. No one needed to. I saw Daniel glance at Tiffany for 1 second, a single panicked glance he couldn't hide. And that was all I needed to know. This entire evening was playing out exactly as I had planned. Perfectly, brutally, and I was the director. But sometimes, even when you're the director of the play, the flashbacks write themselves, returning uninvited, vivid as scenes projected onto a screen right before your eyes. As Tiffany stood trembling, clutching the Opus One bottle with frozen hands, I suddenly heard the voice of Mrs. Marlene, our neighbor from the 39th floor, a 72-year-old woman with silver hair who watered her flowers every morning and never missed a single event in this building. One afternoon, 2 months ago, right after I returned from a 4-day work trip to Portland, she leaned over the balcony, squinting at me, and casually asked, "Madison, were you traveling for work?" I saw Daniel bringing a blonde girl into the garage several times. All week, actually. I gave her a faint smile back then, brushed it off and said she'd probably mistaken someone else. But that moment lingered like a tiny thorn under the skin. It stung, but not enough to make me pull away. Then, just a few weeks later, I accidentally found 5 unfamiliar condoms in the glove compartment of Daniel's Lexus. The kind we never had at home. The kind that definitely weren't ours. I remember exactly where I was, standing in the parking garage, neon lights casting a pale glare on my trembling hands. When I confronted him, Daniel wouldn't meet my eyes. He just chuckled and muttered a line I still hear in a warped, broken record. "Oh, that? A male co-worker borrowed my car for a date. Must have left them there." What co-worker? Why borrow your luxury car? Why leave that behind? But instead of pressing further, I let it go. Or more accurately, I forced myself to believe him, like I always did. All those doubts, the tiny red flags I once dismissed like a wife stubbornly clinging to her marriage, they were coming back now. Lining up like puzzle pieces, disjointed, until now, when they finally snapped into place in front of me, in this very penthouse. And as Tiffany stood frozen under the baccarat chandelier, her heels trembling, the family's eyes locked on her, unblinking, I knew. This was the moment every piece returned to its rightful place. I inhaled softly, placed my napkin on the table, then walked over to the kitchen counter, where my iPad was already open. I turned the screen toward the family and tapped into the Photos app, where I had saved everything Daniel thought he had erased. A drop of pumpkin spice candle wax fell onto the tablecloth as the entire penthouse sank into thick, suffocating silence. I opened the first screenshot. Against the dark message background, the white text hit like a slap across the still air. "Are you still thinking about last night? I can't sleep." Sent at 2:13 a.m. from Tiffany. My voice was so calm, I barely recognized it as mine when I read it aloud. "Are you still thinking about last night? I can't sleep?" My voice drifted across the wide room, echoed against the glass walls overlooking misty San Francisco, then dropped like a stone onto the dinner table, where everyone sat frozen like statues. I could hear the sound of silverware being set down, the breath caught in Elaine's chest, the quiet gasp of children sensing a storm they didn't understand. No one spoke. The air was so dense it could have been sliced with the very knife lying on the table. Tiffany clutched her plastic cup so hard, her fingers turned white. Her lips trembled, as though wind were blowing through, even though every window was sealed tight. Then suddenly, she broke. She sobbed, a loud, chaotic, gasping cry between desperate hiccups. "It's not what it looks like, Madison. It's not. I swear." But the vow of someone drowning in lies sounded worse than silence itself. Her tears slid down her deep V-neck dress, trailing over the gleaming satin fabric, and I simply stood there, watching everything I had known for so long finally lay itself bare beneath the warm lights of Thanksgiving. A day meant for gratitude, not the day Tiffany fell to her knees before the truth of her own making. But what she thought was the truth was only the surface. I gripped the iPad slightly tighter and swiped to the next message, the most recent one, sent just 30 minutes before dinner began. While I was checking the butter on the turkey, Daniel was playing the role of the devoted family man, and Tiffany was probably spraying on more perfume and fixing her hair. I took a deep breath and turned the iPad screen to the room, my voice now lower, heavier. "And this is what I received from Tiffany's ex-husband, sent at 4:21 this afternoon." The screen lit up with a short message that hit like a verdict. "Daniel and Tiffany have been sleeping together since 6 months before our divorce. I know everything. Tristan." The entire dinner table went still in a collective shock. Those words, just a handful of them, had the power to drag the entire Thanksgiving tablecloth into an abyss. Elaine, my mother-in-law, the one always trying to keep the peace, always defending Daniel, lowered her wine glass to the marble table. The delicate clink sounded thin and sharp, like the sound of a heart breaking. Her face turned an ashen white. Her lips quivered in disbelief. My father-in-law gripped the chair so tightly, his knuckles turned ghostly pale. Emily, Daniel's sister, said nothing. She stood up like she'd been electrocuted, rushed to grab her 2 kids, who sat there wide-eyed, confused. "I won't let them witness this," she said, her voice terrified but resolute, and dragged the children away so fast the chairs hadn't even stopped trembling. The door closed behind them with a weighty finality, marking the moment no one in this room could return to normal ever again. Tiffany stood in the center, eyes bloodshot as if hit by wind, lips tinted purple with panic. She tried to speak, tried to explain, tried to salvage a last shred of dignity slipping through her fingers. But the sounds she made were nothing but broken, trembling fragments. I didn't, Daniel said. No sentence formed, no words could save her now. Because today, in front of Daniel's entire family, Tiffany had become the living proof of everything I had pieced together silently over the past 8 months. And this twist was only the beginning. I saw Tiffany standing there, trembling like a flickering bulb about to burn out, and Daniel frozen beside the oven, his hands slick with herb butter still clutching the basting brush. The entire penthouse was drowning in an eerie silence. So silent, I could hear the ticking of the wall clock with painful clarity. I turned to look at the Hermes box Tiffany had brought, the bright orange standing out like a warning she foolishly carried in herself, a self-incriminating gift. "Oh, I almost forgot," I said softly, my voice so gentle it made Daniel flinch. "There's still the special gift Tiffany brought for our family." Tiffany inhaled sharply, her eyes wide in panic, silently pleading for me to stop, but I picked up the box before she could utter a word. Calm, steady, without anger, I gently untied the Hermes silk ribbon like I already knew exactly what lay inside. As the lid came off, I didn't look at Tiffany. I looked at Daniel, and in that instant, I saw his heart drop. Inside the box was not a scarf, not a leather wallet, not any gift one would bring to a holiday dinner. Lying quietly on a bed of cream tissue paper was a familiar black and white sheet, a 12-week ultrasound image. Beneath it, in shaky silver ink, the words, "Our baby, T and D." In that moment, the air in the room froze, as if someone had flung open the door to a deep freezer. The world stopped. No one breathed. No one moved. No one dared blink. Tiffany broke into sobs, hands covering her mouth, and Daniel staggered back like someone had just punched him in the chest. Frank, my father-in-law, was the first to explode. He slammed a hand onto the dining table so hard the wine glass jumped, red liquid splashing like blood. "Daniel, you've disgraced this entire family!" His voice echoed off the glass walls, ricocheting like thunder in a room full of candlelight and roasted turkey. My mother-in-law clutched her chest, face ash-gray, lips pursed in shock too deep for words. Daniel, the man who once vowed to protect me for life, just stood there, mouth open but speechless. He tried to swallow something back, to say something, to pretend he still had control. But all he could manage was a hopeless shake of the head, like a child caught red-handed, with no excuse left. I looked at him, at Tiffany, at the ultrasound photo in front of us, and I realized the truth wasn't just exposed. Tiffany had wrapped it in Hermes, tied it with silk, and delivered it to my door like some cruel gift from fate. And tonight, none of them would escape it. Tiffany sobbed into her hands, took a few steps back as if gasping for air, then turned and bolted toward the door without looking anyone in the eye. The sound of her heels on the marble floor pounded fast, frantic, like the heartbeat of someone fleeing from their own sins. The penthouse door closed behind her with a sharp click, and my mother-in-law leaned on the table, trying to rise, but her legs trembled, refusing to hold her. Frank helped her up without a word, avoiding Daniel's eyes, as though even looking at his son for one more second would be too humiliating. Emily had already left with her children, and now my in-laws exited the penthouse too, their heavy footsteps dragging the weight of suffocating silence. When the door shut a second time, the echo was so loud it felt like the final slam of an old life. And then, nearly 2,000 square feet of glass, marble, and fall-scented candlelight held just two people, me and Daniel. No more eyes, no more interruptions, just the two of us, facing each other in a space thick with the smell of turkey, pumpkin spice, and betrayal baked into every marble seam. I said nothing. I walked to the dining table, where a small tote bag I'd prepared days ago waited quietly. I unzipped it, pulled out a stack of evidence I once thought I'd never need to use: messages, hotel bills, shady wire transfers, and the bank statement Daniel thought I'd never see. I tossed everything onto the marble kitchen island, papers fluttering down like white birds, landing in front of Daniel with a cold, crisp slap. "This," I said, voice steady and low, not a hint of a tremble, "is your real life?" Daniel opened his mouth to say something, but I didn't give him the chance. I reached for his iPhone on the island, gripped it tightly, and smashed it against the cold marble floor. The screen shattered, a burst of blue light flaring like one last gasp before the phone went dark. Daniel flinched, took a step back, eyes wide in disbelief, as if what I had just shattered wasn't a phone, but the mask he'd worn through 7 years of marriage. I didn't look at him. I walked to the stainless steel trash can by the kitchen, the one he insisted we buy to match the aesthetic of the penthouse. I opened the lid. The warmth of the Wolf oven still radiated behind me. I pulled out the roasting tray and lifted the nearly 20-pound turkey he'd spent 6 hours preparing. That golden, butter-glazed, picture-perfect turkey, the symbol of the happy family he tried to perform, crashed into the trash with a sickening final thud. Daniel let out a faint, broken sound. And me. I slipped my wedding ring off my finger, turned it once in my palm like I was saying goodbye to something that had once been sacred, then dropped it into the trash, where it landed among turkey and torn truths. My love, I said, slowly, deliberately, was garbage too. I didn't wait for Daniel to respond. I didn't wait for an apology. I didn't wait for any explanation. I grabbed the suitcase that had been standing by the door since morning. As its wheels rolled across the floor, the oven timer let out one final, drawn-out ding, a sound that rang like fate laughing in my face, and I walked out of the penthouse without looking back. The cold San Francisco wind slapped my face as the building doors shut behind me, but strangely, I felt lighter than I had in months, as if that oven timer's final ding hadn't signaled a turkey's readiness, but the end of a marriage I'd tried to protect for 7 years. I drove straight to Pacific Heights, to Aunt Sophia's house, the only woman in my family Daniel never managed to fool. A retired divorce attorney with over 30 years of experience, she didn't need much explanation. She opened the door, looked at my face, and said just one thing. "Come in, sweetheart. Let's begin." We sat at her cherry wood table, the amber light casting shadows across every page, illuminating the fractures of my life. For hours, Aunt Sophia and I built a full timeline of Daniel and Tiffany's affair. Texts, emails, hotel receipts, those oddly long meetings, overlapping work trips, wire transfers labeled emergency fund, garage entry photos Mrs. Marlene sent me, and even an Uber receipt Daniel thought I'd never notice. Aunt Sophia typed so fast her keyboard sounded like war drums. The PDF, 67 pages long, read like a legal obituary. Clean, sharp, not a word wasted, not a fact omitted. I even added an audio recording of Daniel whispering, "I crossed the line," but she needed me. His voice shook at the end, not from guilt, but from fear of being left by Tiffany. That shook me even more. Every piece, every puzzle fragment, was perfectly in place by 2 a.m. when we finished with the final page. Violation of workplace conduct policy. Grounds for immediate termination. Aunt Sophia made final edits and saved the file as harassment_conflict of interest _DanielHarris.pdf. By 9 a.m. Monday, I hit send. The email went straight to the CEO, HR, legal department, and board of directors. Within 45 minutes, the CEO called me to confirm they'd received all necessary evidence and would take immediate action. By 10:07 a.m., I got a message from a former coworker. Daniel was escorted out by security. His badge was deactivated. Everyone's in shock. I stared at that message, and for the first time in months, I exhaled. Tiffany didn't last much longer. Just an hour after Daniel's firing, an internal company email leaked. Tiffany Williams has submitted her immediate resignation, but no one believed it was voluntary. They called her the name every American woman fears, the pregnant mistress. As for the penthouse, it was jointly owned by Daniel and me. But the evidence of infidelity left him no leg to stand on in the preliminary divorce agreement. His lawyer suggested selling the property quickly to cut losses, and I agreed. The result: I got back every dollar I invested. Daniel lost the house, lost his reputation, lost the career he spent 15 years building, and lost me. As for me, I got myself back. 2 months later, when the divorce papers were signed and sent to my mailbox, I simply stood in front of my new apartment in Pacifica, looking out at the gray-blue ocean stretching all the way to the horizon. The apartment was much smaller than the old penthouse, but it offered something the penthouse never could: unconditional peace. In the morning, I sipped coffee on the balcony, listening to waves crash against the rocks. At night, I heard seagulls gliding past my windows instead of Daniel's excuses about last-minute meetings. I began transforming the old vet clinic into a non-profit rescue center for abandoned animals, taking in pets discarded after the pandemic, treating injured strays from the streets, and working with volunteers I never thought I'd meet in this lifetime. A post I wrote about leaving a toxic marriage, along with a photo of me holding a rescued pit bull, unexpectedly went viral. Thousands of women sent messages saying they saw themselves in my story, that they felt seen, felt stronger. While replying to an email from a woman in Texas who was begging for help after suffering financial abuse from her husband, my phone pinged with a message from an old college friend. Just a photo, no explanation. I opened it and barely recognized the man in it. Daniel, no suit, no polished office, no Tag Heuer watch he once bragged, was his reward to himself. He was standing at a suburban construction site, wearing a dirt-streaked reflective vest, his face darkened by sun, his hair graying halfway like a man in his 60s. He was holding a cement bucket, his eyes vacant, staring at the ground. I stared at the image for a long time. Not because it hurt, not out of triumph, but because for the first time in all the years I spent beside him, I saw the truth. This was the man I tried to build, to save, to protect. A man who, once he had no one left to deceive, no title to hide behind, and no me to lean on, looked exactly like who he truly was: sad, hollow, and self-destructing. I turned off the phone screen and opened the balcony doors a little wider to let the sea breeze flood in. No tears fell. They weren't needed, because for the first time in years, my future no longer depended on what he left behind, but was led entirely by my own 2 feet. And just when I thought my life now only needed the ocean, the clinic, and the little souls I rescued, I received an email with a subject line that made my heart stop for a second. Invitation: Women in Veterinary Leadership, Keynote Speaker. I read and reread that line under the Pacifica sunlight, seeing my name listed as the featured speaker, side by side with renowned veterinarians from across the country. On the day of the conference, I walked into a grand hall bathed in golden light, where hundreds of women in the field, from clinic owners and researchers to students, filled every seat. As I stepped up to the podium, I saw eyes full of anticipation, faces carrying signs of fatigue, of sacrifice, of countless stories that mirrored mine. I took a deep breath and said the one line I had carried with me the entire way: freedom is not something given. Freedom is what we claim by daring to walk away. The room fell silent for a few seconds, as if everyone was letting that sentence sink into the corners of their hearts. Then the applause erupted, powerful, relentless, so long and loud I had to place a hand over my chest to steady my breath. After the talk, women came up to hug me. Tight hugs like they had carried pain in silence for too long with no one to listen. Some spoke of husbands who controlled their finances. Others shared about loveless marriages lasting decades. One woman trembled as she told me she had left an abusive man just last week. Each story felt like a part of my own, and for the first time, I was no longer just a survivor, but a testament that women can rise, can walk away, and can live a brand new life, I left the conference as dusk settled. The last light of day touched my shoulders, soft as a thank you from the universe. And I knew this was me walking toward true freedom. A few weeks after the conference, I received an invitation to an art auction fundraiser for an African antelope rescue program, an annual event hosted by San Francisco's wildlife conservation community. I arrived on a chilly afternoon, the gallery air scented with cedarwood and red wine in people's glasses. Spotlights made the wildlife paintings look alive. Glowing eyes of leopards, antelope herds racing through twilight, and elephants standing still in the vast desert. I lingered a long while in front of a lion painting, a full-grown male with a tangled mane staring directly at the viewer with eyes both fierce and weary, as if it had fought its entire life and still had to rise again. As I moved closer to study the thick brushstrokes and scorched gold palette, a warm voice spoke beside me. I painted that after I escaped the wrong marriage. I turned. A tall man in his 40s, with deep blue eyes like a winter sea, stood just a few steps away. Christopher Hale, the name I'd seen in art features, but never imagined meeting in person. He wasn't holding wine, wasn't leaning against the wall, wasn't trying to impress. He just stood there, calmly, like a part of the painting behind him. I looked back at the lion, then at Christopher. "It looks resilient," I whispered. He nodded gently, like breath. "Resilient, but wounded in the right place. That's why it's still standing." Our eyes met. Not a spark of infatuation, not a jolt of chemistry, but something softer, deeper, a quiet resonance, like two people who had walked through enough darkness to recognize light in each other without needing to reach out. I smiled, not flinching, not rushing. Christopher smiled back, so gently my chest warmed without warning, and in that room full of voices and clinking glasses, I realized something simple. When the heart has healed enough, it doesn't rush into anyone. It simply recognizes who's walking toward it. A few days after the auction, Christopher visited Pacifica after a photo shoot for his new collection. He brought 2 glasses of red wine and a soft gray wool scarf, saying the sea was colder than usual tonight. We stepped out onto my apartment balcony, where the ocean breeze drifted in like someone had opened a door for a new season to enter. I raised my wine glass and looked out at the night sea, the moonlight painting a silvery trail across the surface like a fragile beam of hope. The waves below lapped gently against the rocks, steady and patient, like the heartbeat of a new life taking shape in the kind of quiet I never knew while living with Daniel. Christopher stood beside me. No words, no touch, no interruption, just present, calm and respectful, as if he understood that not every woman needs saving. Sometimes she just needs to be left in peace, to breathe, to exist without fear of being hurt again. I slowly swirled the wine in my glass, gazed into the deep night waters, and smiled. A smile not born of revenge or triumph, but of rebirth. "You have to taste bitterness to truly understand the sweetness of freedom," I said, not to him, but to myself, carving the words into the bottom of my soul like a final vow for the long journey I'd completed. Christopher simply nodded, his gaze still on the ocean, and in that stillness, I knew. I didn't need new love to complete me. I only needed myself, grounded, free, and at peace. The Pacifica sky wrapped around it all like a gentle ending, and for the first time in years, I saw my future stretch wide like the sea before me, boundless, fearless, and beautifully mine. If Madison's journey touched your heart or made you feel a little less alone, I hope you'll take a moment to like, subscribe, and share this story with a woman you love. Who knows? Maybe, somewhere out there, it might bring her the bit of peace she's been searching for. Wishing you a soft evening, and may your heart always have room for gentleness, especially from yourself.